All right, what is up, everybody? Good to see you. Welcome to another weekly update live stream. So, what is new this week? This week I have been working on Atek database. So I just put this up as a blog post, but I'll go ahead and give a rundown on what I'm talking about in that blog post, what we've been doing. I'll demo some of the software updates, and then I don't know, maybe we'll do a little bit more coding, or maybe we might just kind of explore a bit of the code to show y'all what's going down on that. As always, feel free to ask me any questions you have while this is going, and I will be there to answer. So let's talk about what's going on with Atek database. So with Atek DB, it has been, really with all of Atek, a lot of what I've been going through in the design of Atek is starting out with an initial idea of how something can be of schemas, and then how those schemas can be strictly enforced by the system to help make sure everybody's software stays compatible. And very early versions of Atek, both the database and the RPC layer, were really strict about this. It would be the kind of thing where you would be expected to publish your schemas as JSON schemas up on some URL, and then whenever they were used, they'd be downloaded automatically off that URL, and then you would it would be enforced by Atek. That was one of the initial designs, and I got to the end of it and realized, like, you know what, this is getting in my way. It's complex, it's paternalistic, it felt like. And so gradually what I ended up deciding was that the rule here is tools, not rules, right? Because I'm a developer, I know what I'm doing, sometimes I just need the system to get out of my way. And so I've refactored a lot of this multiple times, and by the time that the Atek site went live, things had gotten relatively simpler, but there was still a little bit of that kind of strictness baked into the Atek database, and that was along the lines of having a schema which you would sort of quote-unquote install into an application, or excuse me, into a database. And if you read the documentation right now, it will explain precisely how all that was designed. But as I was working on the RSS reader, as I described here, I ran into some complexities around that, where basically the statefulness of these installed schemas was really jamming up my development flow. And this is not atypical. If you've ever used a SQL database, you have to go through, writing migration scripts so that you can, you send like the create table or update table commands to the SQL database. It's well-trod territory, but frankly, I just wasn't super in love with going through that tooling more or much less. I wasn't really thrilled with the possibility of confusion that would come around these schemas, where somebody wants to make an update to a schema that they didn't initially create. So they think, okay, I'll make some updates and I'll push it to the database, and then you get incompatibility there. So basically that strictness was doing us no favors whatsoever. It was too relaxed to make sure that people don't make mistakes, but it was still too strict to not get out of your way. So in the past week, what I've been doing is, basically one of the things that kind of became clear is that this is the most common usage pattern for using the Atek database, which is that you're going to create your database, and then you're going to import, if you're using somebody else's schemas, they're going to be published in a module. So you'll import those schema modules, and then those schema modules operate on the database. So import subscriptions from this example tables. This doesn't really exist, but I import the subscriptions, table schema, and then I pass into it my database, and then I call the create function or the list function, right? So the schemas are actually getting shared around by these NPM modules. And if they live there, then they don't also need to live in the database, right? So if they're also living in the database, they're just getting in the way. So basically what I said is, you know what, forget it. Atek database is not going to enforce these schemas. That is going to be up to the end users. We have a convenient way to do it. We have good tooling to have strict schemas through these modules if you want to use it, but if not, we're not gonna jam you up on this. So as a consequence of that change, Atek DB's software has now updated to look like this. And this is still a work in progress. In fact, I was working on this right up until we started the live stream, which is why, unfortunately, I haven't been able to publish all these changes yet, and I also have to update all the docs. But it's a much more flexible design. In fact, let's explore the RSS reader's database here. And it kind of is like a hybrid between like a key value database like CouchDB and a file system. And the reason it's kind of like a file system is that you have containers or folders or subspaces. So here at the top we have the Atek RSS.atek.cloud. That's kind of a namespace, and then we have the individual schema names inside of here. So here's a subscription to an RSS app, and here's an individual feed item pulled from a subscription. I open that up and I can see the actual records here. And so if I click on this one here, this is the record which represents the Stack Overflow.blog RSS subscription. And I can make modifications to the JSON here and save it. I can rename the record, clone it, export it. So it is compared to the current software, which is way more opinionated and tries to do kind of some magic things to make it all have nice descriptions and things like that, which was a fun idea and there was a lot of merit to it. This was much more in the realm of, you know what, let's just make sure I'm giving people really good tools to get directly to their data and getting out of their way. So this is where the Atek database design is moving towards. You can do some pretty fun things with this. You can create your own database, StreamDB for the live stream. Let's call it the LiveStream DB. So now I've just created myself a nice little Atek database, and I can add records. Hello, cool stuff, and save it, and there you go. Right. So neat little JSON document store, and I think this is just way more intuitive, way more clear about what's going on behind the scenes. And so this is the direction that Atek will be going down. Part of this also, of course, is helping organize the databases that are created by the different applications. And so that's what we're seeing in this screen here. We have the database created by the RSS reader. We have the databases that I personally created listed down here. We have the server database. This is the one that gets created by Atek automatically to store all of the configuration of the server. So if I go down in here, you can see here's my user record. And here is the current login session I have, which I don't suppose it's too dangerous to be sharing all that. Don't think anybody's going to be able to hack me while I'm streaming. Who knows? We've got the different services that I've installed listed here. The different databases that have been created, the records for them. So the explorability of the data sets is very, very well paced out for you. You can really see what's going on inside of your system by just digging into these databases. And, I would probably recommend not to futz around and start modifying these records directly unless you really know what you're doing, because it will let you do that. But you could if you want to, and I've had more than one occasion where I'm working on something and I really wished I could, because I would keep on changing core software and I need to update my schemas and what have you. So now I can, and if anybody else is working on core, they can, or if you're just working on your RSS reader application and you're like, oh, you know what, this thing needs to change, so now you just jump in and modify the thing directly. So way, way, way more convenient. I'm really quite happy with how that has turned out. So that's what's been going on this week. In terms of development, there is one other detail that I implemented, and this is a piece that is getting a lot of kind of active work. I'm still really trying to wrap my head around the right model for accessing applications that are installed. Currently, it all depends on using localhost and subdomains on localhost. So if I go to the RSS reader that I've installed, for instance, it goes to rssreader.localhost. It appears that that doesn't work on Safari, but it does work on Firefox and Chrome. And there's some complexities around cookie sharing between the subdomains and the top domain with localhost. It doesn't work the way that you would think it should because they treat localhost specially. So I've had to kind of come up with some hacks around that. And so I'm still poking a little bit at the precise model for how that's going to work out, especially in the long term. But one of the things that I did introduce, again experimentally, but it is how I want this to be able to work, and it seems to work so far, again, we'll see, but is the ability for applications to run like this, where it takes over the whole screen and it's a normal web application under a subdomain, or to be able to run in what we call frame mode, which is basically still inside of your home application, what's called Lone Star, and just kind of embedded in an iframe. And so here the Hello World application has been updated to work that way. And so then you still have access to all the rest of your UI. And what's kind of neat about this is I had an application for that straight away, which is the Atek database, which now functions in that way. So the Atek DB now hosts its own UI, which is just put inside of a frame inside of the home application. So this is a nice model for certain applications that really just make more sense to be kind of kept in the context of your your desktop environment, so to speak, the home application. They can just embed in as iframes like this. And Atek DB is just a really good example of that. I don't want to go to some other subdomain, some other app. I just want to kind of have it embed directly into my Atek UI. So those are the two changes that have occurred this week. And I'm going to try to wrap up all the work that I've been doing on Atek DB to get it to get it all documented, make sure it's all working the way I hope, and then I can get that out to you all so you can start futzing with it. But hopefully, I think that you'll find I imagine not a lot of folks have dug into building applications because there's still a lot to do, but hopefully once you start working with this, you'll be happier with it than you would have been had I not made these changes. So that's what's going on there. Can I embed another applications frame inside my application? I haven't. So there is definitely a lot of composition that I would like to see happen within the Atek application world. One of the things that I, for a long time, have wanted to have is a social network in which most of the behaviors are actually plugins. And so the idea of being able to embed one application inside of another would be quite nice. I don't see any reason why that wouldn't work. You're going to end up with, you should have nice origin isolation, so that should work fine. So I think that will be an option. The only question is just knowing what subdomain that target application is currently running at, which is not guaranteed, so we'll have to kind of sort through that whenever the day comes. But yeah, that should be possible. And really, what's going on is it's an iframe wrapping around core.adb.localhost. If I just go directly to it, you get the application outside of the frame, right? So there's not a lot of magic happening here. It's really just a different change. If anything, it just kind of changes the behavior about what happens whenever I click on one of these links inside of the main thing, rather than going directly to it. Like in this case, it just says, hey, why don't I just open it up in an iframe? And that's really all that the frame does. So once I wrap up this, I'm really close to the screen. Once I wrap up all this work on Atek DB, I think the next thing I'm going to be working on has to do with the networking layer, and in particular using Hyperswarm's peer-to-peer sockets to be able to basically turn traditional applications into peer-to-peer applications. So this is almost certainly what's coming up next after Atek DB is starting to get the new version of Hyperswarm integrated into Atek and turned into one of the key tools that we have available. Now, if you're not familiar with Hyperswarm, which I imagine not a lot of people are, the basic premise is that you're going to have a public key, which is going to be 64 characters of hex. And you can take this and feed it into the Hyperswarm API and say, I would like to listen to connections on that public key. And that will then announce your device under that public key into the sort of global discovery network. And then other people will be able to say, hey, I would like to connect to that public key. And that will cause them to ask the Global Discovery Network for who that is. It will direct us to that device over there and help us arrange a connection, and therefore you're able to establish a peer-to-peer connection with somebody using Hyperswarm. You basically have a nice and convenient global socket system. And with that, you're able to do a number of interesting things. Of course, once you're able to establish a socket connection to somebody else, the possibilities get pretty large. And so there are two things to think about when we're integrating in the Hyperswarm peer-to-peer socket layer. The first one will be how do we identify people? So public keys are not guessable, right? They're 64 characters of hex, which maps to 32 bytes of random. So they're not guessable, or hopefully they're not. And so what we have to figure out, first of all, is how do we find the public key of the user or the device that we want to connect to, or the service that we want to connect to. So that's task number one, is discovery on the peer-to-peer socket world. And then task number two is integrating apps, etc., into the peer-to-peer socket system. So this part right here, the discovery on the peer-to-peer socket world, this is something that that's really where we're going to start with all this next week. But this gets into the idea really of global identity, because I need to be able to share around some kind of identifier or identifying set of information to a friend, so that they can find the public key that represents whatever service I have running and then connect to it. And there are a lot of ways you can do that. There's the proposal that Ink and Switch put out recently, talking about sending, using something very similar to Magic Wormhole, where you have a one-time code that is used to help, that you share so you can read off over, the code will come up on the screen. It's kind of similar to a phone number, 10 digits or so. You read that off to your friend, they punch it into their computer, and you're able to find each other that way. So there's that kind of one-to-one connection approach. There's also using name systems like DNS, pet names, blockchain names, things like that. So what we are probably going to do on that front, and this is a really thrown together piece of diagramming here, but we will probably have two layers here, which is the ID resolution layer and then the identification document layer. So the ID resolution will be a fully pluggable system, where basically you can install services that provide ID resolving APIs. So if you want to have DNS, there will be there will be an ID resolution service that will go from like a domain name or a URL to your ID document. You can have a pet name resolver that goes to an ID document. A pet name is essentially having a personal address book that you're filling out. You could use something like the blockchain ENS system, the .eth domains, and these would point to an ID document, which will probably, again, I don't know exactly how this is going to be designed, but this is where my head's at right now. Probably the ID documents will just be records on Atek databases that will say something about, okay, which IDs is this record for? Is it actually for pphrazy.com? So you can get some authentication off of that. And then, pointers to the different Atek databases or the different hyper sockets that you export, giving their public key and some metadata identifying what they are. And so off that system, we will be able to discover the different kind of sockets that we want to connect to and share all the kind of address book information that's necessary to arrange that kind of connection. This is sort of where my head's at on how this might be designed, but next week-ish, after I finish with the Atek database work, I'm going to be spending some time plotting out the design for this, and I will write up a proposal, post that, I'll share it on the Discord. I'll be sharing it with folks that, other folks that are interested in how all this is working. So there will be a design process that we're going to go through here to make sure that we're coming up with something that's going to last. I won't rush this one. But this identity and document system, once that is in place, will give us a really nice base layer for this part of it. What's really neat about hypersockets is that they are encrypted as well as authenticated. So both the connector and the receiver know the public key of the other person. Which means that once we have this identity system, we are actually able to handle sort of the question of auth, of login more or less, pretty automatically. So that if I'm connecting to my friend Patrick's computer, it'll say, hey, that's Paul Frazee. I know this because that's his public key in his identity document. So you know this guy, that's Paul. And then your applications are much easier to write as a consequence of that, because the requests that will come into them will have that authentication information already done. So you don't have to bother, with a user management. You don't have to bother with a login flow. In fact, requests shouldn't come to your application unless they're already authenticated, because all of the kind of sign-in process that the local user will go through is handled by Atek. So all the user sessions and login and all that stuff is handled for free, which is very convenient. So then this gets into the question of how we integrate apps and things like that into the Hyperswarm sockets, and it's actually relatively straightforward. You're going to have the peer-to-peer network like I described up there, and then you're going to have Atek, which is the one that's responsible with interfacing with all of Hyperswarm, and then Atek will connect together one of these sockets and will bind it or assign it to one of the applications that it's running. And automatically route those requests to those applications. What's really nice about this is that any application that is a networked application, anything that just listens to a socket, can automatically, for free, access this peer-to-peer network by dint of the fact that it's getting proxied through the Atek daemon. So if I take something like SFTP or SSH, one of those daemons, and I take its listening port and I map it onto the Atek's peer-to-peer sockets, now I'm able to expose that service on the peer-to-peer network. And SFTP, I think, is a really interesting use case for that in particular. SSH, somewhat, I'm a little bit, for some cases, maybe SSH makes sense, but SFTP is great, because then we're getting peer-to-peer remote shared folders just with no extra software work. Just take a typical SFTP implementation and throw it in there. Now, you probably will want to customize those services to respond to the authentication info. So, and it's actually in the Node.js ecosystem, there's some really great SFTP modules already written. So you just take that module and then in the auth layer, respect the authentication knowledge that is being given to you by Atek. And then you can say, okay, this is designed to access this folder only, right? So the permissioning will become incredibly trivial to write for something like SFTP. Now, this is the kind of design that actually gets me excited about what we're doing with Atek, because it's so simple. You're just taking applications that are off the shelf, more or less, not designed to be P2P, and we're able to sprinkle some magic P2P dust on it, and there you go. You're now able to access these things globally with good authentication. So the SFTP thing, is great because you're getting remotely shared folders in a trivial fashion, but then you can even start to build kind of minimal applications off of SFTP. For instance, one of the things I'm sort of thinking about doing is making a sort of an email off of SFTP where you just connect to whoever it is that you're trying to reach, and you just write the mail message into an outbox folder, and then or an inbox folder. And then on the receiving end, you just look through all of the folders that you have given people access to through SFTP, and you just pull out the most recent message files. I don't know if that's a good idea in the long run, but it's very elegant. So it's something that I'm quite keen about and looking forward to plugging in here. We will see just how useful all that is in practice as we go. But I am optimistic at this stage that this can be something that really, especially for some, building a Node.js application, you're almost just building a normal HTTP web server. And by dint of having it run on Atek, it's able to serve people over the peer-to-peer network. So really minimizing the amount of novelty that a developer has to wrap their heads around before they're able to start building Atek applications. If you know how to build a web app on Node.js, you'll know how to build an Atek app. That's, I think, really the kind of targets we ought to be going for in terms of the simplicity of the design. So I'm quite excited about getting Hyperswarm sockets into the system. And hey, Anish, it is really good to see you. It has been a while, so welcome. Really glad to see you. So that is what we're going to be doing after the Atek DB stuff is done. And I moved really fast. I'm sure that this is all just kind of washing over y'all, but I'm doing that just because I know that once it all stabilizes, you'll be able to read all the docs. I'll be try to be very clear about how all that works. Mostly, I'm just trying to kind of prime your brains about where this is headed and the kind of the high level about what's happening. All right, so that's the word on all that. I said I might do a little bit of coding, but frankly, it is Friday. So I don't know if I have any coding juice in me right now. But I will give everybody a minute to ask any questions that you have. It's still so early that I don't imagine I'm getting, a lot of, there are a lot of burning questions out there. But if you have any for me, feel free to drop them in the chat. And if not, we have our Discord, as always, as well as our GitHub discussions, which are great ways to connect with me or with everybody else in the community. So you don't have to ask your questions here. You got lots of other ways to ask your questions. And let's see, while I'm waiting, I'll just kind of browse around, see if there's anything worth sharing here today. We'll share the blog post URL in the chat here in case you're curious. Here's to Friday. Cheers to that. Yeah. Yes, indeed. And now I got to decide if I'm going to go out with some friends. I don't want to hit the bars. All right. Well, not seeing any burning questions coming into the chat, so I'm going to call it a stream for today. At some point in the future, we may have much more kind of active coding like I've been doing back when I did Citizen. But lately, it's really been more about... okay, good question. I'll answer that in a second. Just going to say, lately, it's really been more about me just kind of communicating what the heck I've been doing for the past week. So, oh, great. Okay, we got a couple of questions here. So... Greg is asking, what about type definitions with the shared tables? So I'm thinking, if you're talking about type definitions, you're thinking like TypeScript. And let me zoom in a little bit. That is still present in the design here. It's, in fact, whenever you create one of these schema modules, it's not terribly different in terms of, it just changed from define table to define schema. But the rest of it works exactly the same. And the question, in using these things is... in fact, even the actual method calls give you an option about what to do if validation fails. You can choose to just ignore it, at which point it'll just add a flag onto the record saying, that's not valid, technically. Or you can have it throw, or you can have it call a function to kind of look at it. So that's how this is manifested, this loosening of the semantics. But the design of the system still provides a nice way to provide TypeScript interfaces for the schemas that you do define, which I have come to find to be very important for correctness. So I was never going to let that part of it go. So you could still, just as easily as before, attach TypeScript definitions to your records. Ryan is asking, I'm curious about options for locking down discovery if, say, you wanted to just make this available to a local network. I don't know the answer to that yet. One of the things that I also am wondering, kind of similar to that, is how do you do service discovery for something that is not meant to be widely available, but only available to select people? That identity document idea that I was talking about is sort of a global thing, so there's going to have to be other means by which service discovery can occur for something which is only meant to be shared with a few people. So we will have to explore how that works. Similarly, like what you're talking about, there may be cases where you just don't even want to announce a service outside of a perimeter, for instance, your LAN. I imagine it will be possible to do things like IP masks. I think that's the right term, but basically selectors saying don't even entertain connections from certain people, or if you are, in this case, what you're describing is staying off of the global discovery network entirely. Again, that should be possible because, the Hyperswarm's discovery system actually uses two separate systems. It uses the global discovery network, and then it uses multicast on the local area network. As I understand it, that is the design. And so I am sure there will be some kind of way to say, just do this on the local discovery network. Don't, over the LAN, don't hit the DHT. So Yeah. Hey, Michael. Good to see you. Unfortunately, you're coming in at the end, but I'm super glad to see you. What color switches do I have on my keyboard? The answer is all of the colors. Let's see if I can get this thing up. There we go. That's right. I'm going full LEDs. This keyboard is actually really cool because obviously the color modes are configurable, and the one that I use, I'm sure many people have seen this already, but if you watch, as you type, it kind of speeds up the rainbow effect, which which is really quite fun while you're late at night doing some coding and you start rattling away on something and the thing starts pulsing along with you. It makes you really feel like a cyberpunk hacker, which is what I live for, right? Yeah, it's a great keyboard. It's the what is this thing? Red Dragon is the brand name. So yeah, it's the LEDs are fun, but the construction of it is also really solid. It's got some nice nice loud switches on them. I think they're maybe browns, but I'm not sure. But great response. Oh, did you mean, yeah, you were probably asking not the actual color. You were asking about the, yeah, it's funny that they use colors for it. I actually don't know. I answered the question that I care about. Let me find out. I'm sure I still have the receipt in my email. Let's see. Red Dragon. Okay, so it's the Red Dragon K556. Yeah, I don't. Let's see. Yeah, brown switch. That's really funny. It didn't even briefly occur to me that you were talking about. Well, the thing is that people, where my head went to actual color of the keyboard, because that's a lot of what people are doing is getting, like customizing their keyboards with different actually colored plastic for the different keys. So that's where my brain went. I don't know why anybody would ever do anything other than the LED, but to each their own. Cool. Another week down. Any other questions for me before we wrap it up? Sorry, Michael. I swear at some point I'm going to do some live coding, but it just has been, we're not at the building applications level too deeply yet. So the only kind of coding I could do is on core, and it's the end of the week and I'm just toasted. So you got to do it. It ain't so pricey. I'm sure you could afford one, and it's totally worth it. It'll drive your significant other crazy, but. Well, this one comes pre-built. It's not like I had to assemble it myself. So, the Red Dragon 556, K556. Yep. High recommendation from me. I love it. If it breaks, I'm buying another one. That's how you know it's good. All right, well, if you're curious, Michael, about what's going on, or anybody else, we got the playback, and this will be archived on my YouTube page, so feel free to go and check that out. Really excited about where things are shaping up. At the beginning of the week, I wasn't entirely sure what the next steps were going to be, and through talking to people and doing some research, really landed on this using the Hyperswarm sockets as the next big step, and kind of this nice, simple peer-to-peer services layer that I think is just going to be a really fun tool to work with, so I'm really pretty excited about all of that. And so next week-ish, I will wrap up Atek database, and then I will start working on the identity layer of this, and that will be proposals that I put up on GitHub and share on the Discord. So watch out for those. Feel free to comment on them, give your takes on where that's headed, because I will need that kind of feedback to know if I'm missing anything. because it very easily can. But I think that it will be a relatively, hopefully 2 weeks or so, and then we can lock that in and start doing some peer-to-peer services. And I am really excited about P2P, SFTP. I think that's just going to be a really cool tool. So keep an eye out for that. And with that, I'm going to let you all go. Have a great weekend, and I will catch you on Discord, GitHub, Twitter, and anywhere else you happen to be in the same space on the internet. So see y'all later.